The Great Codex of the Galactic Concordance was less a library and more a monument to the concept of certainty. It floated in the silent gravitational cradle of Cygnus X1, a construct of spun crystal and solidified light, holding within its memory banks the verified history of 13,000 species across 100 billion star systems. Dr. Eris Thorn, a Cathar whose chitinous plates shimmered with the soft blues of her homeworld's oceans, was one of its keepers. Her title was Chrono-Archivist, a designation that implied a mastery over the unyielding river of time itself. In reality, her job was far more mundane. She was a glorified janitor of causality, sweeping up the dust bunnies of data corruption and ensuring the past remained as static and immutable as the laws of thermodynamics. For 10 millennia, the Concordance had rested upon a foundation of absolute historical fact. There were no myths, no gods, only the recorded and verified march of progress from single-celled organisms to the star-spanning civilization that now held gentle dominion over the galaxy. It was a beautiful, orderly, and somewhat boring truth, and Eris had dedicated her life to preserving it. The first flicker of impossibility came not with a bang, but with the quietest of digital whispers. It concerned the Veil system, a thoroughly uninteresting trinary star cluster cataloged 9,000 years ago as being devoid of planetary bodies. A stellar footnote notable only for its violent gravitational tides. Yet, during a routine diagnostic of pre-concordant stellar charts, Eris found a ghost. A single, isolated data packet, time-stamped from the original survey, that described not an empty system, but one teeming with life, a lush, superterrestrial world named Velis IV, home to a civilization of silicon-based flora that communicated through harmonic resonance. The report was rich with detail, containing spectrographic analysis, atmospheric composition, and even a rudimentary translation of the flora's song. It was impossible. The official record, cross-referenced across a million other data points, was unequivocal. Velis was, and always had been, barren. Eris sighed, her three mandibles clicking in mild annoyance. It was a deep-level data fragment, a piece of digital flotsam that had somehow become entangled with the official record. These echoes were rare but not unheard-of remnants of discarded simulations, corrupted sensor logs, or even the fanciful imaginings of a long-dead surveyor. With a few precise commands, she isolated the phantom record, flagged it for archival quarantine, and restored the Veil system to its proper, boring state of emptiness. She thought nothing more of it, but the universe, it seemed, was only just beginning to clear its throat. A week later, another archivist, a gelatinous being from Plexus, reported a similar anomaly. The historical records of the Gnar Imperium, a warrior race absorbed into the Concordance 3 millennia prior, now contain detailed accounts of a century-long war against a species called the Fenrir, a species that did not exist. There were no records of them, no archaeological evidence, no mention in any other species' history. Yet, within the Gnar archives, there were star maps of Fenrir territory, schematics of their warships, and even sorrowful epics written about the final battle over their lost homeworld. It was another ghost, more elaborate and complex than the one from Vels, but a ghost nonetheless. It, too, was quarantined. Then the glitches began to accelerate. Not just historical records, but fundamental data started to fray at the edges. The accepted value of the gravitational constant fluctuated by a decimal point for a few picoseconds. The spectral class of a well-documented star flickered from a G-type yellow dwarf to a K-type orange dwarf and back again. The Concordance's central chronometers, synchronized to the pulsing of a captive black hole, began to disagree with one another. their variances measured in nanoseconds, but growing with each cycle. The senior archivists convened, their holographic forms shimmering with concern in the central chamber. They declared it a system-wide cascade failure, likely caused by a previously unknown form of radiation emanating from the galactic core. Task forces of engineers and physicists were assembled to diagnose and repair the flaw in their perfect machine of knowledge. But Eris felt a cold dread coalesce in her primary thorax, a feeling that went beyond technical malfunction. This didn't feel like decay, it felt like editing. It felt like an intelligence was at work, subtly and meticulously altering the source code of reality. Driven by this unease, she descended into the Codex's sublevels, the digital catacombs where data deemed too dangerous or too unstable for the main archives was left to rot. Here, among the mimetic hazards and paradox loops, she found a sealed vault, its crystalline door etched with warnings that spoke not of corruption, but of blasphemy. The files within were classified under a single cryptic heading, Damnatio Memoriae, the memory of the damned. Using her highest clearance codes, Eris bypassed the ancient locks. The vault contained only a handful of fragmented files, each one a patchwork of terrified whispers from civilizations that predated the concordance itself. They spoke of a species known only as humanity. The name was vaguely familiar to her, a half-forgotten word from a nursery rhyme her brood mother used to croon, a tale of shadowy monsters who could steal your thoughts. The files described them not as a biological species, but as a force of nature. They were called the First Weavers, the architects of possibility. The texts claimed that in the dawn of time, when the laws of physics were still cooling into their final, rigid forms, humanity had learned to sing the universe into new shapes. They didn't build starships, they convinced space to fold around them. They didn't forge worlds, they whispered gravitational constants into existence. They were not conquerors, they were authors, and all of reality was their manuscript. And then, the text spoke of a great crime. The nascent empires of that era, terrified of a power that could unmake them with a thought, had united. They had not waged a war against humanity, for to fight them was to fight reality itself. Instead, they had performed a grand and terrible act of cosmic censorship. They had found the fundamental language of existence and had carefully, painstakingly, excised every reference to humanity. They had unwoven them from the tapestry, leaving a universe where they had never been. The concordance, Eris realized with a sickening lurch, was not the pinnacle of galactic evolution. It was the scar tissue that had grown over an amputated truth. It was a lie so profound and all-encompassing that it had become real. Before she could process the sheer, mind-breaking scale of this revelation, the Codex's primary alert system shrieked through the silent archives. A Priority 1 distress call was being broadcast from the Kepler 1886 system, a remote scientific outpost on the galaxy's edge. Eris raced back to the main archival chamber, her mind reeling. The message from Kepler 186F was not a report of an attack. It was a broadcast of pure, undiluted metaphysical terror. The lead scientist, a being of crystalline logic named Xylar, was babbling incoherently. His voice, usually a model of calm detachment, was strained with panic. "It's wrong. It's all wrong," Xylar stammered, his transmission cutting in and out. "The fine structure constant is drifting." We watched the speed of light slow down by 3 meters per second. The electron charge is unstable. It's like the universe is molting. Behind him, a live feed from the outpost's main observatory showed the stars themselves seeming to waver, their light bending at impossible angles as if seen through flawed glass. "There's a resonance," Xylar continued. his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. We detected it emanating from what should be empty space. It's not a frequency. It's a theorem. It's a mathematical proof being broadcast across space-time. And it's proving our reality to be a flawed subset of a greater equation. The song is wrong. They're retuning the stars. The transmission ended in a burst of static that was not an absence of signal, but a presence of something else, a sound that was both a chord and a question, a note of cosmic inquiry that vibrated deep within Eris's bones. And then, silence. The Kepler 186 system, along with its 5 planets and its terrified scientists, vanished from the Concordance's star charts. It wasn't destroyed, it was simply no longer there. The space it had occupied was now a placid, unblemished void, as if it had never existed at all. The Veil's ghost, the Fenrir war, the drifting constants, the Kepler erasure, they were not separate incidents. They were symptoms of a single, horrifying cause. The Concordance wasn't being attacked by an enemy fleet. It was being overwritten by the original author. The memory of the damned was returning, and it was reclaiming its creation by deleting the revision. That night, Eris locked herself in her private archival node, the blue light of the holographic interface painting, shifting patterns on her chitin. She frantically cross-referenced the fragments from the Forbidden Vault with the recent anomalies, searching for a pattern, a weakness, anything. The deeper she dug, the more the fabric of her own reality began to unravel. The official history of her own species, the Cathar, began to flicker. Passages describing their evolution on a tidally locked ocean world dissolved, replaced by contradictory accounts of them originating as desert nomads on a world with 3 suns. Her personal logs, her own memories, seemed to thrum with uncertainty. Was the taste of salt from the Great Sea a real memory, or just a well-written line of code? As she stared at the screen, her heart cycles hammering against her ribs, the text of the Concordance's founding charter, the most sacred and immutable document in the galaxy, began to corrupt before her eyes. The elegant, formal script melted away like ink in water. For a moment, the screen was blank. Then, new words began to form, assembling themselves from the raw light of the display. It was a language she had never seen, yet she understood it with a chilling, primal certainty, as if the knowledge had been sleeping in her DNA for 10,000 years. The sentence was simple, declarative, and absolute. In the beginning, we spoke the world into being. You have forgotten the language. We are here to remind you. A wave of vertigo washed over Eris as the very concept of language seemed to expand in her mind. The words on the screen were not just symbols. They were commands. They were the executable code of existence. As this new, terrifying understanding bloomed in her consciousness, the power grid of the Great Codex failed. The soft, ambient light of the archives died. The hum of the life support systems faded, and the holographic displays vanished, plunging her into a profound and absolute darkness. But it was not an empty darkness. In the silence, she could feel it. A low, pervasive vibration that was not a sound but a presence. It was the author, manuscript in hand, ready to begin the great edit. And Eris Thorne, the humble janitor of causality, was standing on the first page to be rewritten. The darkness in the Great Codex was not merely an absence of light. It was an active, suffocating presence. It pressed in on Eris Thorne, thick and viscous, and it carried with it the ghost of a sound, the deep, subvocal hum of a loom the size of a galaxy rethreading its warp and weft. She was adrift in the raw potential of the void, and her mind, the meticulously ordered palace of a chrono-archivist, was coming apart. Memories that were not hers bled into her own. For a terrifying second, she felt the coarse sand of a triple-sun desert beneath her pedipalps, her Cathar body replaced by the wiry, nomadic frame of a creature she'd only read about in the now flickering histories of her people. She tasted the synthetic protein paste of a void dweller who had never seen a sky, and felt the crushing grief of a Ginnar warrior watching the Fenrir homeworld burn a war for a world against a people who had never been. These were not hallucinations, they were possibilities. Alternate drafts of history lapping at the shores of her consciousness. The universe was becoming a quantum superposition of every story it could have ever told, and the story of the Concordance was being drowned out by the sheer volume of the others. The presence, the authors of this chaos, spoke to her not in words but in concepts. She felt the elegant, brutal simplicity of the equation that was unmaking her reality, a mathematical truth so fundamental that it made the Concordance's laws of physics look like a child's clumsy scrawl. It was a feeling of profound, intellectual humiliation, the terror of a scholar realizing their entire library was a work of fiction. A single and desperate instinct cut through the fog preserve. She was an archivist. That was her function, her truth. Even if the library was burning, she had to save a single page. Scrambling in the absolute dark, her claws scraped against the cooled crystal of her terminal. She still had the data crystal containing the Damnatio Memoriae files, the forbidden lore of humanity. It was the only thing that felt real anymore, the only text that acknowledged the fire. She needed to get it out. The Codex was a tomb, its systems dead, but Eris knew its secrets. She knew of the old maintenance conduits, the forgotten physical tunnels that had been superseded by teleportation grids millennia ago. She knew of Docking Bay 94, a relic from the station's construction that housed a single antique shuttle, a chemical thrust, physically piloted vessel named the Obstinate Moat. It was a museum piece, kept on the books only due to a bureaucratic oversight. It was also completely disconnected from the Codex's compromised network. Her journey through the station's guts was a nightmare descent into Escher's forgotten sketchbook. Corridors twisted back on themselves. Gravity plating failed, sending her tumbling through spaces that were momentarily sideways. And the very material of the walls seemed to shift, from spun crystal to pitted iron to something that felt unsettlingly like bone. The ghosts of other realities flickered at the edge of her vision, a Concordance patrol floating dead in the corridor, their uniforms suddenly changing to the livery of an empire that had never existed, a section of the wall dissolving to reveal a starscape with unfamiliar, screamingly bright constellations. She navigated by memory alone, a memory that was itself under assault. Finally, she reached the bay. The Obstinate Moat was there, a squat, ugly little ship covered in 1,000 years of dust. Its systems were purely mechanical. Its navigation computer, a relic that calculated jump vectors using punch cards. It was perfect. As the bay doors groaned open to the void, Eris got her first look at the new cosmos. The serene, orderly tapestry of the Concordance was gone. Space itself was boiling. Nebulae swirled with impossible colors. Star systems flickered in and out of existence like faulty holoprojectors. And a great, shimmering wave of something was expanding from the galactic core. It wasn't light or energy. It was a wave of pure revision, a cosmic find and replace function. She knew she couldn't outrun it. But the files on her data crystal were her only hope. They spoke of the ancient empire's desperate act of censorship, but they also hinted at places the rewrite had failed to fully take hold, places where the old reality was too strong, too complex to be easily overwritten. They were called anchor points, or more poetically, knots in the thread of time. She needed a pilot, And not just any pilot. She needed a criminal, a cynic, someone who had spent their life flying the gaps in the Concordance's perfect system, a navigator who trusted their gut over the star charts that were now actively lying. She needed someone at Port Anomaly. The port was a hollowed-out asteroid clinging to the edge of the Trappist trade route, a wretched hive of smugglers, renegades, and information brokers. When Eris guided the obstinate moat into its chaotic docking bay, she found a civilization on the verge of a psychotic break. The unraveling was not a gentle fade here. It was a violent, cacophonous collapse. A Xylosian merchant was screaming that his cargo of rare energy crystals had transformed into petrified fish. A squad of enforcer drones had frozen mid-step, their targeting software unable to reconcile the fact that the fugitive they were chasing was now, according to his genetic signature, a member of their own species. Beings flickered, their physical form shifting between a dozen ancestral templates, their clothes and technologies changing with them. The station's announcements were a babble of dead languages and impossible grammar. It was a world losing its own definition. In a dimly lit cantina where the very concept of alcohol was struggling to maintain a consistent chemical composition, she found him. Kalen was a Lyran, a species known for their sharp senses and even sharper cynicism, though at the moment he looked less like a predator and more like a cornered animal. His fur was matted, and his 4 ears twitched nervously at the dissonant sounds of reality coming undone. He was a disgraced Concordance freighter captain, kicked out for repeatedly ignoring official flight paths in favor of his own intuitions, which the review board had called reckless endangerment. Eris knew him by reputation as the only pilot to have successfully navigated the shimmering wastes, a region of space known for its unpredictable gravitational tides, a region she now suspected that was one of the knots. She approached his table, the data crystal clutched in her claw. "Kalen, I have a job for you." He looked up, his golden eyes narrowing. "Sister, look around. The universe is having a seizure. I'm not taking any jobs. I'm trying to figure out if this drink is going to stay as a fermented grain or turn into sentient plasma." "I am not offering you credits," Eris said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chitin. Credits were meaningless now, melting into puddles of abstract value. "I am offering you a destination, a place that might still be real when all of this is gone." She slid the data crystal onto the table. "This is a map, not of where to get, but of what to avoid. It's a chart of the lie we've been living in." Kalen stared at her, then at the crystal. He was a survivor, and his survival instincts were screaming at him that the logical, ordered universe he had been taught to distrust was finally showing its true insane face. He had always felt that the star charts were too neat, too perfect. He had always sensed a deeper, wilder current flowing beneath the surface of things. "And what's at the end of this non-map?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "A ghost story," Eris replied bariacoi, her mandibles clicking softly. "A place called the Orrery of Upsilon. According to the oldest poet, most forbidden texts, it is not a place but a device, a working model of the original universe, built by the ancient empires as a way to understand what they were about to erase. It may be the only thing left that remembers the true laws of physics. It is the only anchor we have." The cantina flickered violently. For a half second, the entire room became a primeval forest, and Kalen was a 4-legged beast of prey. Before snapping back, that was enough for him. "My ship, the Vagrant, docking Claw 7, if she hasn't turned into a flock of birds. We leave now." Their escape from Port Anomaly was a frantic flight through a collapsing idea. The station's corridors reconfigured themselves around their ship, docking clamps became grasping tentacles of unknown metal, and the void outside was no longer black, but a kaleidoscope of bleeding colors. Kalen flew with a feral grace, his hands dancing over controls that flickered between Lyran and a dozen other alien scripts. He wasn't navigating space anymore. He was navigating a narrative that was fighting its own revision. Once they were clear, floating in the screaming chaos that had replaced interstellar space, Eris plugged the crystal into the ship's antiquated navigation system. The files bloomed in the holographic tank, but they were not star charts. They were a web of contradictions, a map of what was no longer true, highlighting the areas where the rewrite was most aggressive. It's like sailing through a hurricane by watching where the waves are breaking, Kalen murmured, his eyes wide. So where's the eye of the storm? Where's this orrery? Eris traced a line through the shimmering chaos. The texts are fragmented, apocryphal, but they all point to one region, a place so gravitationally and causally unstable it was declared unnavigable by the Concordance 1,000 years ago, the Chasm of Echoes. As Kalen adjusted their course towards the coordinates, the ship's proximity alerts screamed, but it wasn't an object the sensors were detecting. It was a paradox. Ahead of them, drifting silently in the churning void, was the first true sign of the enemy. It was not a warship of metal and energy. It was a construct of pure logic, a physical manifestation of a sentence. It looked like a cathedral carved from a frozen moment in time. Its architecture fluid and self-contradictory, its spires branching into infinities. It radiated no heat, no energy, only a profound and unshakable sense of certainty. As they watched, a nearby star system, a bright, healthy yellow star with a retinue of gas giants, began to warp in the presence of the human thing. The planet's orbits decayed in an instant, not spiraling into their sun, but simply ceasing to be orbital. The star itself did not explode. It just changed its mind, its color shifting from yellow to a deep, tired red, as its entire billion-year history was rewritten into that of a much older, dying star. The human vessel had not fired a weapon. It had simply presented a new thesis, and the star system had been forced to agree. "How do we fight that?" Kalen whispered, his fur standing on end. "We don't," Eris said, her gaze fixed on the impossible cathedral. "It isn't here to fight us. It's here to correct a grammatical error, and we are living in the middle of it." The journey into the Chasm of Echoes was not a passage through space, but a descent through layers of discarded reality. It was a cosmic wound where the ancient empire's act of censorship had been sloppiest, a place where the universe's original draft had been crumpled up and thrown away, but never fully incinerated. Twice, the laws of physics were not merely unstable, they were suggestions, and often contradictory ones. Kalen flew the Vagrant not with the precision of a pilot, but with the improvisational genius of a jazz musician. The ship's antiquated sensors were useless, screaming about phantom gravitational shears and tidal forces that belonged to stars that had died before the universe was born. He navigated by feel, by the thrum of the deck plates beneath his feet, by the way the chaotic light outside bent and warped. He was chasing the echoes of a space-time that no longer existed, following the ghost of a current in a river that had long since run dry. "It's like the universe is dreaming here," he muttered, his four ears swiveling independently, trying to make sense of the dissonant hum that filled the void, and were flying through its nightmares. Eris, strapped into the co-pilot's seat, was fighting a different kind of battle. The chasm was a library of ghosts, and it was whispering to her. As they passed a swirling vortex of fractured light, her mind was flooded with the history of the Sthel, a species of sentient gas clouds who had communicated through intricate dances of lightning. They had built empires in the hearts of nebulae and written symphonies in the language of stellar winds. They had never existed in the Concordance's records. They were a footnote in a deleted paragraph. And their entire magnificent history, their art, their loves, their wars, now existed only as a painful, fleeting echo in Eris's mind. She clutched her head, the weight of 1 billion forgotten souls pressing in on her. She was becoming an archivist of the unreal, the curator of a library that had been razed to the ground. The human presence grew stronger as they went deeper. They saw more of the cathedral-like constructs, which Eris began to call syllogisms. They weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were mobile arguments. They saw them drift past a rogue planet, a chunk of frozen methane and rock. The syllogism seemed to observe it, and under its silent, logical gaze, the planet's chaotic, billion-year history of geological turmoil resolved itself. The jagged craters smoothed over. The chaotic strata of its crust settled into neat, orderly layers, and its core, once a messy slush of heavy metals, solidified into a perfect crystalline lattice. The syllogism hadn't destroyed the planet. It had tidied it. It had imposed a more elegant narrative upon its messy existence. "They're not conquerors," Eris breathed, a horrifying understanding dawning. "They're editors." They're looking at a messy, chaotic draft of a story, and they're polishing it, making it cleaner, more logical. The Concordance, with all its diverse, illogical, beautifully chaotic species, we're a continuity error they're correcting. Their destination, the orrery of Upsilon, was located in the chasm's heart, a region of pure, conceptual chaos. According to the forbidden texts, it was shielded not by energy fields, but by a paradox, a localized loop of causality that made it impossible to arrive at unless you had already been there. It was a navigational puzzle that had kept it hidden for 10 millennia. As they approached the coordinates, the space in front of them folded into an impossible knot. Kalen wrestled with the controls, but the ship was caught in a current that wasn't moving through space but through time. The cockpit canopy showed them glimpses of their own immediate future, and past the vapor trail of their own engine stretched out before them. A fleeting image of Eris from a moment ago flickered in her seat, her mandibles still forming the words she had just spoken. "We're stuck in a loop," Kalen yelled, his knuckles white on the yoke. The navigation computer is chasing its own tail, Eris's mind, reeling from the temporal distortion, latched onto the core of the problem. It's a logical trap. The orrery can only be reached by an act of illogical faith. She looked at the frantic pilot. The Concordance taught us that the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line. The humans operate on a different axiom. The most elegant path is the true one. Stop trying to fly to it. Just be there. Kalen stared at her as if she'd lost her mind, which, given the circumstances, seemed a reasonable assumption. But he was a creature of intuition, and the archivist's insane words resonated with the same gut feeling that had told him to distrust the perfect star charts. He closed his eyes, took his hands off the controls, and for a terrifying moment, let the ship drift. He didn't plot a course. He simply intended. He pictured the orrery, not as a destination to be reached, but as the place where they already were. The temporal vertigo intensified, the ship groaning as causality itself strained against the maneuver. And then, silence. The chaotic swirling of the chasm was gone. They were floating in a sphere of perfect, tranquil blackness. Before them, suspended in the void, was the orrery of Upsilon. It was beautiful and terrifying, a ghost of a reality that should not be. It was a sphere of crystalline clockwork the size of a small moon, and within it, stars and galaxies of captured light moved in elegant, silent orbits. But these were not the stars of the concordance. The constellations were wrong. The galactic spirals moved with a different grace, and the light they emitted felt older, more real. This was a model of the universe as it had first been written. As they drifted closer, a section of the orrery's surface became translucent, revealing a chamber at its heart. Inside, something was moving. A lone figure, humanoid in shape, was tending to the celestial model, making minute adjustments to the orbit of a miniature galaxy with a gesture of its hand. It was a human, but it was not like the cold, logical presences of the syllogisms. This one felt different. It felt weary. A channel opened on their comms, and a voice filled the cockpit. It was not a transmission of sound waves, but a direct impression on their consciousness, a voice that felt like ancient stone and starlight. "You are the first visitors in 10,000 years, the voice said. It was calm, resonant, and tinged with a profound sadness. "I am the caretaker. I did not expect anyone to remember the way." "We found your history," Eris projected back, her thoughts clumsy and slow compared to the human's effortless communication. "We know what the concordance was built upon. We know you're rewriting everything." Kalen, recovering from the psychic shock, added his own gruff thought. "And we'd really prefer if you didn't. We've grown rather fond of our continuity error." The figure in the orrery turned, and though they could not see its face, they felt its full attention upon them. "You believe we are your enemy. You believe this is an act of vengeance. It is not. It is an act of mercy." The miniature galaxy within the orrery pulsed with a soft blue light. Eris felt a torrent of information flood her mind, a condensed history of what had happened after the ancient empires had performed their great cosmic edit. The human narrative wasn't one of a species biding its time in exile, plotting revenge. It was far more tragic. When they were excised from the universe, they were not destroyed. They were cast adrift in the raw, unwritten void outside of causality, the place of pure potential from which they had once woven reality. There, they found they were not alone. Other things existed in that nothingness, concepts, ideas, possibilities that the universe, in its formation, had wisely chosen to exclude. Beings of pure, malevolent logic, paradoxes with teeth, ideas so antithetical to existence that to even comprehend them was to be annihilated. The humans, the first weavers, had spent 10 millennia not plotting a return, but holding these things at bay. They had become a metaphysical dike, a seawall holding back an ocean of uncreation. "We are failing," the caretaker projected, the sadness in its thought voice deepening. "The things in the outer dark are learning. They have seen the flaw in our universe, the scar you left when you cut us out. They are beginning to press through the wound, to seep into your reality. The illogical fluctuations you have witnessed, and the fraying of your physical laws that is not our doing. That is them. That is the ink of the abyss bleeding onto the page. The syllogisms, the cathedral ships, were not weapons of erasure. They were an immune response. They were reinforcing the fundamental laws of physics, patching the holes, reasserting a single stable narrative to prevent the entire story from being consumed by gibberish. "We are not erasing your history," the caretaker concluded. "We are trying to solidify it into a form that can withstand what is coming. Your diverse, chaotic, wonderful reality is too fragile. It is riddled with contradictions they can exploit. To save the story, We must simplify the plot. Eris felt her entire being grow cold. Their horrifying, godlike enemy was not their enemy at all. They were the galaxy's only saviors. And their method of salvation was to edit the Cathar, the Lyrans, the Ganar, and 10,000 other species out of existence, not out of malice, but to make the universe a less tempting target for the horrors that lay beyond it. She looked from the ghost of a true universe within the orrery to Kalen, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. They had come here seeking a weapon or a weakness. Instead, they had found a justification. They were faced with two impossible choices allow their existence, their history, their very identity to be methodically and logically erased, or fight their saviors and, in doing so, open the floodgates to an enemy that would not just rewrite reality, but would unwrite it altogether. A profound, crushing silence descended upon the cockpit of the Vagrant. The caretaker's revelation was not an attack they could dodge or a riddle they could solve. It was a terminal diagnosis for a universe they had just learned was terminally ill. Kalen stared at the impossible clockwork of the orrery, his cynical swagger finally and completely shattered. He had spent his life defying the neat, predictable order of the Concordance. Now he was being told that the only alternative to that order being gently erased was an apocalypse of pure, gibbering madness. So, that's the choice he thought. His voice a ragged whisper in the psychic space the caretaker had opened. A clean death, or a messy one. We get erased by the doctors, or we let the disease take us. The caretaker's presence felt ancient and immeasurably tired, like a mountain that had weathered 1 billion years of storms. It is not a choice we offer. It projected, its tone devoid of malice, filled only with the heavy weight of necessity. It is an observation of a process already in motion. The first whispers from the outer dark are already within your reality. They are the seeds of illogic, the paradoxes that your concordance mistook for rare, natural phenomena. Eris's mind, the mind of an archivist, reeled as it connected the dots. The shimmering wastes Kalen had navigated, a region deemed a gravitational anomaly. It was a place where the rules were being unwritten. The ghost records in the codex, the flickering of constants, they were not edits from the returning humans, but the first spray from the storm that was breaking against the hull of their reality. The humans weren't the storm. They were the desperate sailors trying to patch the leaks with the only material they had, the absolute, rigid certainty of their own forgotten existence. "Why haven't you told anyone?" Eris asked, her thought a mixture of accusation and despair. Why this silent, terrifying purge? The Concordance would have helped. We would have fought with you. A feeling of pity, vast and sorrowful, flowed from the caretaker. Fight them with what your starships fire projectiles governed by the very physical laws they seek to devour. Your strategies are based on a causality they do not recognize. To fight them is to try and shout down a hurricane. You cannot fight a contradiction. You can only cede to a stronger logic. The human paused, allowing the weight of its words to settle. And how could we tell you the very act of describing the things in the void is to invite them in? Their true names are equations that break the mind. To speak of them is to create a foothold for them in your reality. We have remained silent for 10,000 years to protect you from the knowledge that would have unmade you far sooner. Kalen slammed a fist against the console, the physical act a small, defiant gesture against the crushing metaphysical weight. So, what now? We just roll over and let your syllogism ships tidy us up into non-existence. There is another way, the caretaker said. And for the first time, its ancient calm was tinged with something else. Hesitation, fear, a path we chose not to take. A variable we deemed too dangerous to introduce into the equation. The orrery shimmered, and the captured light within its crystalline shell rearranged itself. The model of the old universe dissolved, replaced by a single, intricate structure that glowed with a fierce, white light. It was a latticework of impossible complexity, a web of pure information. "This is the source code," the caretaker explained, "the fundamental syntax of existence from which we once wove the cosmos. What your ancestors did was not to destroy us, but to sever our access to this loom. They locked us out of our own workshop. When they did so, they did not just erase humanity, they weakened reality itself. They turned a complex, multi-threaded narrative into a simple, linear story. It is that simplicity that makes your universe so brittle, so vulnerable to the things that lie outside." "You're saying you can restore it?" Eris asked, a sliver of hope piercing through her despair. "You can restore the old universe, the one with the Sethel lightning dancers and the Fenrir warriors, and us. We can," the caretaker confirmed. "But you do not understand the cost. Our original creation was not the stable, predictable clockwork that your concordance cherished. It was a place of wild, untamed potential, a place of gods and monsters, where belief could shape the stars and a single, powerful will could rewrite physical law on a whim. It was glorious, and it was terrifying." The image in the orrery shifted. It showed them glimpses of this older cosmos. They saw fleets of starships powered by the collective sorrow of a poet race. They saw suns being forged in the heart of a nebula by the sheer and focused anger of a warrior monk. They saw a civilization that had built its cities in the fourth dimension, their citizens appearing as fleeting, incomprehensible ghosts in the normal flow of time. It was a universe of epic, unrestrained narrative, where the rules were not fixed, but were constantly being debated and rewritten by its inhabitants. To restore this, the caretaker warned, is to unleash that power once more. We would not be your editors. We would simply be the most experienced authors in a room full of aspiring writers. Your species, all the species of the concordance, would awaken to your own latent potential to shape reality. Most would be driven mad by the power. New empires would rise and fall in a single day, built on nothing more than a shared, powerful dream. It would be a cosmos of endless, beautiful, horrifying war, a war of competing stories, a war for the soul of reality itself. But it would be a cosmos that could fight back, Kalen said, his eyes gleaming with a reckless fire Eris hadn't seen since they met. It would be a universe that isn't a sitting duck, waiting to be tidied up or eaten by paradoxes. Indeed, the caretaker affirmed, it would be a universe strong enough to resist the outer dark, but it may well tear itself apart in the process. We chose the path of the edit because it was safer. It was a controlled demolition, a way to preserve the core of existence, even if it meant losing much of its beauty. The alternative is to hand every living being a pen and pray they do not scribble the manuscript into oblivion. The decision hung in the space between them, a choice of impossible weight, an orderly, managed extinction at the hands of their saviors, or a chaotic, violent, but potential-filled existence in a universe where anything was possible. It's not your choice to make, Eris said finally, her voice resolute. She, the archivist of the fixed and the certain, found herself arguing for chaos. You say you are editing the story for our own good, but a story with no characters is not a story. It's a blank page. You have no right to erase our chapter, messy and illogical as it may be. The caretaker was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, Its thought voice was heavy with resignation. "We had hoped you would understand, that you would see the elegance of our solution, but you are human in your own way. You cling to your flawed, chaotic narrative. So be it." The white lattice of the source code within the orrery pulsed, a single thread of light detaching from the whole and snaking its way through the void towards the vagrant. It passed through the ship's hull as if it were not there and stopped in the space between Eris and Kalen. It was a single shimmering line of pure information, a sentence from the universe's original manuscript. "The loom is locked," the caretaker explained, "but it can be reactivated from a single point within your reality, a nexus where the veil between the worlds is thinnest, where the original code can be reinserted. This is the key. Take it to the heart of the anomaly you call the Shimmering Wastes. Find the silent star. Place this key within its core, and the great unlocking will begin." The line of light solidified, coalescing into a physical object that floated in the air before them. It was a smooth, palm-sized stone that seemed to contain a captured star field, its internal light shifting and swirling. "A warning," the caretaker added, its presence beginning to fade as if its duty was done. "The syllogisms will perceive this act as the ultimate introduction of chaos. They are logical constructs. They will try to stop you. They will not be your saviors anymore. They will be your executioners. And the things from the outer dark will be drawn to the key, like sharks to blood. They will know that you carry the seed of a reality strong enough to defy them. You will be hunted by the forces of absolute order and the horrors of absolute chaos." The comm channel closed. The orrery's surface became opaque once more, a silent, crystalline moon hanging in the void. Kalen reached out a hesitant hand and took the stone. The moment his fingers touched it, a jolt went through him. His fur bristled, and his eyes widened as 1,000 forgotten histories, 1,000 potential futures, flooded his mind. He saw himself as a pirate king, sailing ships of pure thought, as a lonely explorer charting seas of probability, as a god forging a new home for his people from the raw stuff of chaos. It was the promise of what his species, what all species it could become. Eris felt it too, a resonance from the stone that awakened something deep within her Cathar DNA, a latent memory of a time when her ancestors did not just catalog the past, but could sing it into new patterns. The power was terrifying, and it was intoxicating. "Well, archivist," Kalen said, his voice trembling but filled with a wild, exhilarating energy. "Looks like we have a new destination. Let's go make a mess." As he turned the vagrant and plotted a course for the Shimmering Wastes, the ship's long-range sensors screamed to life. A dozen contacts, moving with impossible speed and perfect precision, were converging on their position. The syllogisms were coming. The tidy-up was over. The war for reality had begun. The flight from the orrery was a frantic, desperate scherzo played against the silent, booming percussion of a new kind of war. The syllogisms, no longer saviors but now the antibodies of a rigid, dying reality, moved with the terrifying grace of absolute logic. They did not fire weapons. They presented arguments. A beam of pure mathematical certainty would lash out, not aimed at the vagrant's hull, but at its concept. The ship's shields would flare, not with dissipated energy, but with rejected proofs of its own impossibility. The syllogism's attacks were axioms stating that a vessel of its mass could not achieve such velocity, that its power source violated a forgotten law of thermodynamics, that its very existence was a paradox. Kalen, gripping the controls and the reality-warping stone, fought back with the only defense they had, illogic. He flew the ship like a drunken poet, weaving through the battlefield in loops and arcs that made no sense, that served no tactical purpose other than to be narratively interesting. He dodged a syllogistic torpedo by momentarily convincing the universe that his ship was not a ship at all, but a fleeting memory of one. The stone in his hand pulsed with warmth, a silent co-author to his madness, reinforcing the ship's right to exist simply because its story was becoming too good to end. "They're trying to bore us to death," he yelled, a manic grin stretching his face as he swerved around a geometric absolute that would have erased them. Their logic is flawless, but it has no style. Eris, meanwhile, was fighting a war on a different front. Her mind, now a conduit for the key's power, had become the shield. She, the archivist who had once worshipped fact, now had to actively deny it. When a syllogism projected a proof that the Lyran species was not evolutionarily viable, she countered by flooding the space around them with the raw, chaotic potential of 1,000 Lyran myths and legend stories of trickster gods and star-sailing heroes that were so compelling, so true in a narrative sense, that the logical proof simply dissolved against them, unable to gain purchase. They were not fighting with technology, but with aesthetics. Their only hope was to be a better story than the one the syllogisms were trying to impose. The shimmering wastes were worse than they could have imagined. It was not a place, but a condition. It was the universe's scar tissue, a chaotic jumble of cosmic might-have-beens. They flew through the host of stillborn galaxies and the echoes of empires that had existed only for a nanosecond. The very air of the cockpit seemed to hum with the whisper of conversations that never happened, and the light from outside was from stars that had chosen not to be born. It was here that the other enemy found them. The things from the outer dark, the static, were drawn to the key's focused narrative power like moths to a flame. They did not appear as ships, but as glitches in the fabric of their perception. A patch of the view screen dissolved into television snow. The sound of Kalen's frantic maneuvering was replaced for a moment by the sound of breaking glass. The ship's chronometer began to run backwards, then sideways. These were the unthings, and their attack was an assault on meaning itself. A wave of pure nonsense washed over the ship, and the deck plates beneath their feet flickered, for a heart-stopping moment becoming weathered wood, then polished obsidian, then nothing at all. The ship's history was being scrambled. Eris screamed as the key flared with a blinding light. She grabbed it from Kalen's hand, its surface now burning with the contained power of a primordial concept. While Kalen fought the syllogism's order, she had to fight the static's chaos. She focused her mind not on myth or legend, but on the simple, declarative truth of their own story. We are Eris and Kalen. We are in a ship called the Vagrant. We are on a mission. She projected this simple narrative outwards, a shield of pure intent. The static recoiled, the gibberish faltering in the face of a coherent sentence. It was a temporary reprieve. They were now caught in the crossfire of a war fought at the level of metaphysics, squeezed between an enemy that demanded absolute meaning and an enemy that demanded no meaning at all. In the heart of the maelstrom, they saw it, the silent star. It was a perfect sphere of blackness, a hole in the roiling chaos of the wastes. It did not radiate gravity or absorb light. It radiated an overwhelming sense of absence. It was the first page the ancient empires had ripped from the book, the place where the universe's voice had been choked into silence. Its core was not a furnace of fusion, but a singularity of negation. This was their destination. "Get us there!" Eris yelled, her body trembling with the strain of holding their story together against the tide of uncreation. Kalen dove the ship towards the sphere of nothingness. The syllogisms converged. their movements no longer calm and measured but frantic. They fired a final, unified salvo, a single, perfect, irrefutable proof that nothing could exist within the null space of the silent star. Simultaneously, the static surged, a tidal wave of pure paradox aimed at the heart of the key. It was the ultimate pincer movement, the forces of absolute order and absolute chaos, united only in their desire to stop the birth of a reality that could defy them both. The universe held its breath. Kalen closed his eyes. He let go of logic, of tactics, of survival itself. He remembered the feeling of letting go when they entered the orrery's paradox. And he did it again, not just with his ship, but with his soul. He became an act of pure, impossible faith. For an instant, the vagrant ceased to be a physical object and became only the concept of arrival. They passed through the wall of logic and the wave of nonsense as if they were nothing more than bad ideas. They were inside the silent star. Here, there was no time, no space, only a profound and patient silence. In the center of the void hung a single and frozen point of light, the star's muted heart. Eris, with the last of her strength, reached out and placed the key against it. The moment of contact was not an explosion. It was a sound, a single, clear note that was both the beginning of a word and the striking of a chord. It was the universe clearing its throat after 10,000 years of enforced silence. The note expanded, a wave not of energy but of pure potential. The silent star ignited, not with fusion but with a billion new stories. The great unlocking had begun. Across the galaxy, reality buckled and bloomed. On Cathar, an old priest looked up from his sacred texts as the words began to glow. The forgotten histories of his people's magic-wielding ancestors rising from the page like embers. In the Lyran homeworld, a child playing in the dirt suddenly found he could shape the soil into living creatures with a thought. The Gnar, a species bred for millennia as concordant soldiers, felt the echoes of their lost honor. The noble war against the Fenrir, become not a ghost but a living memory. A power they could draw upon. The syllogisms caught in the wave of blooming narrative simply dissolved. Their perfect logic, their absolute certainty, could not survive in a universe where truth was suddenly a matter of perspective and passion. They faded like chalk drawings in the rain. The static, the unthings from the outer dark, shrieked and recoiled. The rich, complex, multi-layered new reality, a searing agony to their very nature. They fled back into the cracks and crevices, their power to unravel meaning nullified by a universe that now had meaning to spare. On the bridge of the vagrant, Eris and Kalen collapsed, the wave of creation washing through them. They felt their own DNA rewrite itself, latent abilities and forgotten instincts waking within them. Eris felt the history of her world not as a record to be read, but as a song she could help compose. Kalen felt the currents of space-time not as hazards to be navigated, but as stories to be explored. When they finally opened their eyes, the view screen showed a universe reborn. The stars shone with a new, fiercer light, the light of epic poems waiting to be written. The nebula swirled with the raw colors of creation. The cosmos was no longer a quiet, orderly library. It was a riot of unchecked imagination, a place of infinite danger and infinite possibility. Eris looked down at her three-fingered claw, which now shimmered with a faint blue light. She was no longer a janitor of causality. She was a storyteller. Kalen grinned, his 4 ears twitching, not with fear, but with an exhilarating curiosity. The ship's navigation chart was no longer a map of stellar coordinates. It was a shimmering, shifting tapestry of myths waiting to be investigated, of legends to be proven true, of adventures to be had. Their old life, Their old universe was gone, but for the first time, they felt truly, profoundly alive. "So, Archivist," Kalen said, his voice ringing with the thrill of a new and boundless tale, "where to first?"